In this video we're going to take a look at text options for Pictures to Exe, but using Photoshop. Pictures to Exe has several text options available to us, but it's not doing a disservice to this software to say that it can't really compete with a modern image editor like Photoshop or Photoshop Elements, particularly when it comes to styles, effects and creative techniques. Having said that, the one major advantage of Pictures to Exe is the fact that the text always remains live and editable. So if you're creating text slides for a lecture, a talk or a demonstration, then Pictures to Exe text is probably going to have some advantages. Now when we create text in Pictures to Exe, that text is automatically created on a transparent layer. It's this option that allows us to place text over an image, and as I've said, that text remains live and infinitely changeable. Working in Photoshop's layers we can do the same thing, but we do have a greater choice of fonts, gradients, textures, bevels, outlines, styles and all manner of creative layers techniques. Let's take a look. Now I've opened up a new blank canvas here about the size we would use for a slideshow, and just over halfway down on the toolbox here, if I click and hold the bottom right corner, we can see we have 4 different options for the type tool, but to be honest I think we can forget the bottom 3. We can learn all we need to learn from the top one, the horizontal type tool. As soon as I've selected it, if I click into the picture, Photoshop gives us a little bit of text and encourages us to type whatever it is we wish to type. Once we've written our text, we need to commit that text if we're ready to do so. We can do that in a couple of ways. We can go up to the tick at the top of the screen and click, and there you see it committed. But we can get back into it fairly easy just by clicking alongside the text. If I was then going to move over and pick up another tool like the Move tool, that commits the text. If I select it again, we do need to select the horizontal type tool to select the text. Once I've selected it again, I could commit the text by clicking just outside my canvas over here, or if I was moving on to do some work on the background, as I select the background you can see the text is selected or committed. I'm going to go back to my Photoshop text, which you'll also notice is created on its own layer. Coming back to my text then, and with the text tool I'm going to click and drag to highlight the text. I'm going to take you up to the top to show you the fonts, but they're likely to open up and cover up my text. But when I selected the text, I've got the text tool, but as I move slightly away, Photoshop changes to the Move tool. Pretty convenient because that's exactly what I want to do. So if we go up to the top left here, we've got all of the normal options we can expect to see from a word processor. Font and font style, size, sharp or soft, on the left, on the right, in the center, we've got colors and much more. Let's just take a look at the fonts. When I drop them down, the one thing you'll notice is there's rather a lot of them, and the good thing about them, we get a sample on the right, but as you can see, as we mouse over these we get a real-time example of how it's going to look, and that can be quite useful when we're putting together artwork. For this demonstration though, I'm going to stay with the Arial. In the next box we get the opportunity to choose a number of options. I've got italic here. I'll go back to regular I think, but you can see there's quite a number of choices. And the next one is an important one because that's the size. If we go to the drop down window, we can see the maximum size we can select here is 72 point, but all of these here are placed there for our convenience. They're like a quick and easy default. We're not limited to text of 72 point because as you can see here, if I move it back into the center, that's not very large. In fact, what I can do up here is just over type that value. So if I wanted to put 200 in there and click somewhere up the top, that commits the text, and there you can see it much larger. There is another way we can do this too. If I place my cursor alongside the text somewhere and click, if I hold my control key, you'll notice a bounding box appears around the outer edge of the text. I'm holding the key. I can drag a corner toggle, and as you can see I can lift it up a little bit and drag it to the right. If while I've got that box I release that control key, now I've got quite a bit of freedom here. I can hold it and move around as much as I like to get the text as big or wherever I want it, whether I want it long and thin, tall and fat, lots of options here. And once again, when we're happy with what we've selected or created, we can just click somewhere else and the text is committed. Another great part of Photoshop using text, if I go to the top of the toolbox and pick up my Move tool, if I pick up my text I can move it around because that is actually floating on its own transparent background. But you'll notice there those pink lines, they are the smart guides. And while I was talking, without any effort at all, I was able to place Photoshop text smack bang in the center from a horizontal and vertical point of view. Now I currently have the Move tool selected. Now I was just about to say to you that we need to go back to the toolbox and select the Text tool to be able to highlight the text again. But in actual fact, since the release of Photoshop 2019, we don't have to do that. I'm not quite used to this myself because I've been using Photoshop so many years, old habits die hard. But look how quick and simple this is. I've just used the Move tool to move my text into the place that I want it. Then I've decided maybe I do want to make a change. I just go back to my text, double click, and it's instantly selected. And if you look at the toolbox, so is my text tool. Now that's pretty convenient and clever programming, I think. So I could go up to the top here, and if I wanted to drop the size of this down a little bit, I want to keep it fairly big so we can see what we're about to do, but if I selected 500 as an example, I can just click around anywhere else and that text is committed and changed accordingly. Now coming back to my text once again, I'm going to double click to select it, but in actual fact I'm just going to click at the start, because if we look up at the top we've got opportunities here to make the text sharp, crisp, strong, smooth, and I'm sure you can look at them yourselves later. If we've got more than one line of text we can have them level on the left, level on the right, or centered. But we also have a color option. Now generally speaking I use black as my color option, but I would eventually change the font color using the effects in layers. But this option here can be useful if you wanted each letter, for example, to be a different color, because what you could do here is highlight the letter P and make that red. We could highlight the H and make that green, and so on. So if we had a need for multicolor text, there you have it. So I'm going to double click my text again and then I'll just click within it. I think what I'll do here is click and highlight. I'm going to hit Control C, which copies that to the clipboard. I'm going to put my cursor at the end and use the Enter key to tab down, exactly as we would in a word processor. Then I'm going to hit Control V and paste that text in place. I'll hit the tick and I'll just move it up into place. We do have another option to close the gap between our text. We can stretch the text out left to right, but we can often have a need to close up the gap. Now to do that, if I double click my text and it's highlighted, what I'm going to do here is go up to this option, click to bring it on screen. It's not that part that I want, it's this part, and it's this one just here. Now we get a series of points which we can select, but if I select one of these, it's going, well, let me do it and you'll see exactly what happens. So you can see the effect of what's going on here. But if I put my cursor in that box there, I can use my down arrow to make it smaller and my up arrow to make it larger. And if you want to make it move faster, hold the shift key and you can see I could quickly step that to that sort of position, so I've closed the gap up between the two rows of text. And we can do a similar thing by stretching the text left and right there. So if you wanted to do that, there's your option to do it. I'll give it a little more space, I think, or in fact I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll shut those two down. I'll highlight my text at the bottom and hit delete, and I'll put that cursor back up there and backspace or delete, so I've got my text back as we first created it, and I'll drag it down into the center of the screen, move around the text. Look at those smart guides, they are pretty clever things. Snap, 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 it will snap into the center. Very, very clever. So let's look at one or two other options. Now in a moment from the layers I'm going to open up the effects, so I'm going to pick up my text and move it up to the top left so the panel doesn't cover up any of the text when we look at it. I said a few moments ago that with the move tool selected we can double click and the text is automatically selected and the text tool is selected, and I can come over to anywhere like the layers and click and it recommits the text. We can do that by double clicking the text layer too, exactly the same. But what I'd like to do is, with the text layer selected, come down the bottom, I'm going to open up my blending options and we'll tuck that down here so we can see the layer styles and the text we're going to affect. Now Photoshop gives us so many options here that it's almost too much for one video, so what I'd like to do here is maybe just look at the two we're going to use most of all, and then we'll look at some of the others in a later video. So I want to move down first to the color overlay down here. This is going to overwrite the black and the colors we applied a little earlier. So if I tick the box here, it'll naturally change to whatever color I was last using. But I can make adjustment by highlighting the area to the right of the tick box. Now you can see I get the options appear on the right hand side. So now I get the opportunity to change the opacity, but the most important part is this little square. So if I just click that, the color picker opens up to me and I can pick any color that I want. Let's give myself something reasonably bold. OK. And the next option that's popular is the drop shadow, because it gives the text a little bit of a 3D look, a little bit of body. So if we tick the box once again, it'll remember the last settings used. Obviously the settings are not high here, but you can see it. If I untick it, you can see the drop shadow there. But to get to the adjustments, we need to highlight the drop shadow. Now we've got all of the parameters on the right hand side. We can choose the color, how it's blending with the layer, we can choose the light angle, and we get distance, spread and size. Let me just drag these a little bit to the right and I can change the angle of the light. There we have quite a nice drop shadow. I think I'll actually drop it back a little bit. Sometimes I find it's more convenient to overtype these values rather than use the sliders. Then you'll find you'll soon get a feel for the pixel values you need here. There's also a number of different ways you can apply the shadow, and I've been through all of these and I suggest you take a look someday, but I've not found anything that betters the default here. I'm going to click OK and you'll see that all of those effects sit beneath the layer that we've got the text on. Now that's good for a number of reasons. One of them is if I change my mind, I can double click my drop shadow. I'm straight back into it and I could make a change, so we can make changes as often as we like with any of the effects that we add. Let's go back to the color overlay and change that to something else just to prove that we can. Let's make it bold. And what we can also do is, if we start to get the layers getting rather long, we can tuck those effects away. But there's a little more too. If I've got another row of text and I want the same effects on the other row or the other layer, all I need to do is to hold my Alt key and drag the effects from one layer to another. And I can also turn them on and off with the little eye. Now with the changing of the screen, you can see what I've done. I've just brought my Photoshop text back into the center, but I've added another layer of text. So what was I saying just a few seconds ago? If I want to move the effects I've created on the Photoshop text layer, I can just click, drag and drop. And you can see exactly what's happened. I've moved them from one layer to the other. If I want to copy them, if I hold the Alt key and click drag and drop, I've got exactly the same effects on both layers. Perhaps I'll show you one more effect here. Let me double click the effects on the top layer here. So I'll double click the effects and go back in. I'm going to tick the stroke, highlight the values, select black as my color. Let's move the slider to the right, and there we've just given our text a nice outline. And of course these things happen all of the time when we're in Creative Flow. We make a change to one layer. All we need to do then is do what I suggested a few seconds ago. Alt key pressed, click and drag, and we've got the same effects on both layers. Now I've just noticed my video is rapidly approaching 20 minutes in length, and I don't want to bore you all to death. So I think we'll bring this section to a close and we'll come back and look at more effects a little later. I'm going to select that second layer of text that I created and hit the delete key. And I could either turn off the background, or I'll just drop it in the bin here and get rid of it. Because if I wanted to save this with a transparent background, so I could drop that over the top of an image in Pictures to Exe, then I could save it as a PNG file. But I would suggest you save it as a Photoshop file too. Now the reason you may want to do that is, once we save this as a PNG file, the PNG cannot be edited easily. So we need to be able to get back to our text at this stage, because it's quite possible we spot a spelling mistake. You'll be surprised, I've done that a few times. Or we change our minds with the title. Well, if we've got the Photoshop file saved, I can double click my text and I can change it. As quick as that. But once we're happy, we need to go to File, Save As. We can choose a name. I'll call it Title. From the Save As type, we need to save it first as a Photoshop file, but then for use in the slideshow, we need to save it as a PNG file. The PNG file, as I click Save and OK, will retain the transparent area in the back there. So when we drop that over an image, we can see the image and the text. Earlier on in this video, we went across to the text tool, and I suggested that perhaps the bottom three we could safely ignore. Well, if you look at the second one in these options, it's identical to what we've just talked about here. It's just that it types the text from top to bottom. The other two options create a selection either vertically or horizontally, but I'm not sure we actually need them for this reason. Because anytime we're working with live text like this, if I move my cursor over to the right hand side and into the layers, if I hold my control key and I click the text layer, you'll notice Photoshop selects the entire text. If you look really carefully, you can see that the selection appears to be inside the edge of that black line we added. Well, that's because it is. If I go back to my stroke for a moment, there we can see that the line's been created on the outside of our text. There is another option to place that line inside, and we'll look at that a little bit later. But wouldn't it be better if we needed this option to create live text first, which we can always keep up our sleeve because it's editable? But if I did want to now flood that selection with colour, the way to do it would be to select a new blank layer. I'll turn this layer off because I don't need it anymore. There you can see the selection. I can now flood that selection with any colour by selecting it from the colour picker, but Alt backspace will flood my foreground colour. It's presently black. There we have our text. I'll hit Ctrl D to remove that selection. The only downside now is that the text isn't editable, but we can still save it as a PNG file. It can still be used in our slideshow, and we can still add some of these effects even though it's not live text. And of course now we've got both options up our sleeve.